This episode of Vintage Guitar Magazine's Buy That Guitar podcast is brought to you by Neal's Music. We buy, sell, trade vintage, new, and used musical instruments from the 50s to current models. Check us out at nealsmusic.com.
Looking to buy or sell high-value musical instruments? Check out Stringtree, the new online auction platform dedicated to vintage, collectible, and high-end gear. Enjoy lower fees, community-verified listings, and secure transactions. Join the Stringtree community today and find your next musical treasure. Visit stringtree.co to learn more.
Hello, and welcome to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. I'm your host, Ram Tuli. This podcast is about the joy of guitar. That includes buying guitars, selling guitars, collecting guitars. We're talking vintage guitars, new guitars, used guitars, pre-war, flat tops, electric Spanish arch tops, custom shop guitars, limited edition guitars, basses, amps, effect pedals, lap steels, mandolins, banjo. If it has strings, we're going to talk about it. I spent most of my life studying the vintage guitar market. It's truly something I love and I'm passionate about. I can talk guitars all day, and I'm going to. Today, I'm joined by my friend Neal Shelton, owner-proprietor of Neal's Vintage in Huntington Beach, California. How you doing, Neal?
Good. Doing great today.
You know, I don't think people really understand how I put the Vintage Guitar Magazine guide together. It's this huge craft, and I have all these people with oars helping me push it along. And you are one of my advisors, and I principally rely on you for 70s, 80s, and 90s gear. That is your specialty, right?
Yes, it sure is. Definitely.
And when did you start Neal's Vintage?
Well, I originally started dealing in musical instruments back in the early 80s. And then, you know, as soon as the internet came about, I got online, I built a website, I was buying and selling musical instruments, and I was doing it on the side. My father was a roofing contractor, and I was in the roofing business with him. But eventually, it came to a point he was going to retire, and I had a choice. I could take over the roofing business or continue on with the musical instrument business. Mm-hmm. And I was doing so well with musical instruments, I just continued on. But I had a actual brick and mortar storefront in Huntington Beach from 2006 to 2016. But prior to that, in like mid 90s onwards, I was, I was running like full page ads in Vintage Guitar Magazine. I remember a deal I did a deal with Kirk Hammett, and he had me fax him information and photos on a guitar. And this is before I could email him something, and it's
right.
And I was sort of like, wow, he's going to trust me on a fax, but that's the way it was back then,
Mm-hmm. Where was your store? Yeah. Where was your brick and mortar store in Huntington Beach?
We were at the corner of Warner and Golden West.
Okay. And I know that area. Yeah. My stepdad used to live on Warner, right near there.
Yeah, we were right behind the Carl's Jr., and there was a small bank that sat right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And in the anchor store at that time was Ralph's, but now it is Sprouts. That's what it is right now. But
so you have owned some historically very important guitars in your life. One we talked about a few weeks ago was the EVH Hot for Teacher guitar.
Yes. Yeah, I've been very fortunate, living in Southern California. I started real early on doing all of my buying and selling through the Recycler magazine. This is before there was a Craigslist.
Yep, that was my go-to. Every week I'd go through there looking for Stratocasters, the Recycler.
Well, I would go to the Recycler office at 5 a.m. on Thursday morning and be standing in a line with about 15 to 20 other people. Some of them were dealing in cars. Everybody's dealing in different things. We were waiting for them to open their doors, and I would go in and I'd buy every Recycler edition from San Diego to Santa Barbara. And then back then, I was going to a payphone and calling people on ads, and I would have them page me on my pager if I got their answering machine. Mm-hmm. So that's how far back I go with buying and selling musical instruments. But I used to run an ad also in all editions, top cash paid for musical instruments. And I get this call one day, and this guy, he sounds sort of young on the phone, sort of like hippie stonerish, Mm-hmm. He's like, hey, man, I got one of Eddie Van Halen's guitars. And the first thing I'm thinking, okay, here's a prank. This guy's pranking me. Mm-hmm. But I start talking to him a little bit. He tells me his uncle was the drum tech for Alex Van Halen. And so it starts to sound a little more real. And then I'm like, well, where are you located? He goes, Pasadena. And as soon as he said Pasadena, I think, wow, this could be it. And he goes, look, man, I called Guitar Center and they want me to bring it over there to show it to them, but I don't have any transportation. I go, look, I'll get in my car and come right now. So I drive up there. I walk in the door. There's a guitar case closed, laying there, sitting there on a table, and it's got the Kramer logo on the outside of the case, and then there's some laminated tags attached to the handle, and in those laminated tags is Warner Brother Records, Van Halen. I flip the case open, and bam, there's the Hot for Teacher guitar laying there. So then I ask him, I go, well, do you have any other stuff? And he goes, well, I have a storage unit with more items over there. And I said, well, can we go look at all of that? You know, maybe we can do a package deal. So we go over to the storage unit. He pulls out this olive green 1970s suitcase. It's loaded with itinerary booklets, backstage passes. There's a Polaroid photo album in there with about 30 pages of photos from Van Halen on their first world tour in 1978. They're hanging out in hotel rooms with girls. There's a picture of Eddie with two girls, arm and one on each arm, and he's got a Schlitz malt liquor in his hand. And there's a picture of David Lee Roth laying on the bed with a chick. There's a picture of Michael Anthony. He sort of wedged himself up in a doorway, just being sort of crazy and funny. You could tell they're just like having a great time. They're on their first tour.
Yeah.
And anyhow, then the guy, and then also in the suitcase is the straitjacket that Eddie was wearing at the end of the Hot for Teacher video. So then he goes, well, I have two other guitars. So he pulls out a Kramer Stagemaster. He said, this was given to me on my birthday by Eddie. So Eddie just called up Kramer and said, hey, I need a guitar for my drummer's nephew for his birthday. So he gave him a Kramer Stagemaster. And then there was also a Kramer Farrington. And, you know, in Guitar Player magazine, there's these ads where Eddie is, pictured with Kramer Farrington guitars and showing those. Well, that Kramer Farrington I actually still have. Mm-hmm. I still have that guitar, although, unfortunately, mine has the fancier inlays on it. The ones in the ads have dot inlays. So other than my word of this story, I don't have any authentication yet on that guitar, which I'm searching for it. Mm-hmm. You know, if I could find a picture of Eddie with this guitar, it would be great. But so I still have that in my possession.
So you had that Hot for Teacher guitar for many, many years.
Yeah, I bought it in 1998. I never advertised it for sale, but of course I bragged to people that I had it. I did bring it out to a few vintage guitar shows and put it on display. And in fact, in the early 2000s, well, actually I think around the same year, 98, 99, right around there was a vintage guitar show in Phoenix that was put on by, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he's a well-known music store owner in Phoenix. Anyhow, he was doing this vintage guitar show he did it for a couple years in a row, and then it went away. But he had NBC News come out and interview me about the Van Halen guitar. And I actually, there's video footage on YouTube of me being interviewed by NBC News about this Van Halen guitar that I had on display. He's a well-known guy. He passed away like 3 or 4 years ago. But he was really well known in the Phoenix area of having this vintage guitar show or guitar store for many years. So eventually I kept getting people contacting me that were Van Halen collectors. You know, the first offer was like $30,000. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of money. But, I just got this feeling it's going to go for a lot more. And then finally this guy offers me $100,000 for it. And again, I said, wow, that's a lot, but I feel like if this was in an auction or something, it'd go for way more money. He stayed in touch with me over a course of a year's time, and eventually he ended up trading me 4 guitars that Eddie had hand-striped. So back in 2004, Eddie did a deal with Charvel and Jackson,
right,
where he was hand-striping guitars, playing them on tour, signing them. There'd be a photo taken of him on stage with them, and he was auctioning them off on eBay. And this guy was buying them up like crazy. In fact, he actually won. Eddie had some kind of contest where the person who bought the most guitars or paid the most for one, I'm not sure which it was, would win Eddie's Harley Davidson, which had the stripes painted on the tank.
Right.
This guy won the Harley Davidson. So he's like a total fanatic Van Halen nut, just big collector. Anyhow, he goes, I'll give you 4 of those, and then I have a backup guitar from the 5150 tour and the 100,000 cash. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So he came over to my house. We did the deal. Fast forward to about a year and a half, 2 years ago, he takes the Hot for T-shirt guitar, puts it up at auction. It goes for $3.9 million. Right. That's what it eventually sold for.
And you're like, oh, I had that thing for 8 years.
Yeah, I know. But a part of me, of course, regretted letting it go. But then I started thinking back, and I was like, I took all that money. I invested in my music store. Right. I invested in some housing. Everything comes around, goes around. Yeah. So it wasn't. Yeah. At the time, it was a great thing for me. Another story I liked once you told me was about Kurt Hammett called you up because you advertised a black 54 Stratocaster. Yeah, and that was what I was talking about a little earlier. So, this is back when all I did was run a full page ad in Vintage Guitar Magazine. I would list all my current vintage guitars in there. And I actually had a small collection of custom shop Gibsons, and a guy had contacted me. I believe he was in like Montana, and he had this 1954 black Fender Stratocaster that belonged to Jimmy Bryant. And I ended up trading him. I had maybe $10,000 into these, I think it was about 4 Gibson custom shop guitars. I traded him all of those straight across for the Strat. I put it up for sale in Vintage Guitar Magazine for $36,000. I actually had a guy from Germany that was contacting me, and we were going back and forth on pricing. He was offering $20,000. I was on the fence about it. It's in the morning. This is when my kids are still in school. Mm-hmm. This is like probably around 98 also. Actually probably about 1997, because it was before I bought my house in 98. I actually used the money from this sale to do that as part of my down payment. So I go to my wife. I go, what do you think? Should I sell it to this guy in Germany? He goes, why don't you think about it? Take the kids to school. So I take the kids to school. I drop them off. I pull in my driveway. My cell phone rings, and this guy on the phone, hey, man, I'm interested in your 54 black Strat. And again, he's sort of like the guy from...
Yeah, but everybody from Southern California sounds like that.
yeah, right. And I said, okay. And he, he asked some questions about it. I told him about the condition and all of that, where I got it from. And I said, well, where are you located? And he goes, well, I'm in a hotel. Well, the first thing that pops into my mind, he's over on Beach Boulevard in some, dive hotel, right? Yeah. And I go, well, do you play in a band? And no, at first I said, well, what's your name? And he goes, Kirk. And I go, well, do you play in a band? And he goes, yeah, Metallica. And he goes, look, dude, I can have the money in your account today, he says to me, and I'm like, okay. So, anyhow, so I worked this deal with him, and he goes, look, I'm going to put $20,000 in your account today, and I'll pay the balance off later. So I'm like, okay, let's do it. And he had asked me and he was actually at a hotel in Washington, D.C., and they were on tour. Metallica was on tour. Mm-hmm. So I fax him all the information on the guitar. And this is like I said, this is before email. I don't know. In 98, maybe there was email, but he wanted me to fax it to him, fax him the information. So I fax him all the info on it. And then it comes time to go. I tell my wife, I'm going to go pick us up some lunch. I decided to stop off at the ATM to get a little money to go buy lunch. And bam, in my account is already 20 grand sitting there. Mm-hmm. So he had his assistant go down to Wells Fargo Bank and deposit it directly into my account for me. So I had the deposit. Then a little later, he calls me up. He says, hey, would you want to take some stuff on trade? And he had this ESP Flying V that he had played on the Clash of the Titans tour with when they were touring with Metallica. And he goes, look, he sent me actually about 10 guitars. Incredible. I also knew that he had a real early serial number Randy Rhoads, a black one. Mm-hmm. I tried to talk him out of that one, but he would not let it go. But it was like a real low, I think it was like serial number 3 or something, like a single digit early, like R0003, or it was one of those real low numbers. And he just I couldn't pry it. Yeah. What do you think that black Strat is worth right now? I'd say probably $250,000 or so, I would think.
Yeah, those are...
that would be my guess.
But that's the fun. Isn't that the fun of dealing in guitars? Everybody has that story. I wish I kept this. I had this. But then, you finance your life that way. You basically move to your next stages in life. You buy a house. You start your business with these things. To keep everything, it's just, there's no point. You'd be like me. Yeah, you have everything and nothing, you just play them.
Yeah.
And there's no harm in that.
Well, it's just like I was telling you when we were talking the other day. I'm hanging out in the pool and I meet some people, we're talking and they're talking about their 401k and they start asking me how I do investments. I'm like, well, I collect vintage guitars. Mm-hmm. And I've my guitars have tripled or more in value over the years. And
right.
I feel like I've done much better doing that than if I was doing some kind of banking investing.
Right. I wrote a book in 2020. It was called "Now's the Time to Buy That Vintage Guitar." It was about the golden era. Because I'm a Strat Les Paul guy. I'm focused purely on the golden era. And when I was all done, I decided to do a back of the envelope check on what I call the silver era stuff. The stuff that came in the 80s and 90s. And when I just did the back of the envelope, I realized, holy crap, like anybody who's just focused on this one sector has missed this emerging market. And it turned out that some of the fastest moving stuff was these 80s, this late 70s, 80s, and 90s stuff, especially the American-made stuff. And you were right. As far as investing, return rates on guitars, the stuff that is hottest right now, is really this late 70s American-made pointy, what I call the pointy, colorful stuff. Yeah. And that's why I had to rewrite that book. I literally had to rewrite that book because I had to put all that in there. Yeah. And now it's interesting. Now that I'm doing the vintage guitar price guide, I am totally fixated on this emerging market.
Sure.
The guidebook has 660 pages. Only 6% of that is really that silver era stuff. But that is the emerging market. And so last year and this year, especially this year, I'm really beefing up that section. And I've like you were instrumental because you give me all this information. But I got to give a shout out to Brett Coleman, J.D. McDonald, Peter Fung, John Dannert, Lee Jackson, James Pittman, Jeff Lysick, all these guys have been helping me put together this whole emerging market, which I really never paid attention to. And in the scheme of things, there's really two types of vintage guitar collectors. There's the old school guys like I was who buy and collect Stratocasters, Les Pauls. And then there are the pointy guitar guys, the guys that grew up playing Deans and Jacksons. And for the longest time, those two circles did not meet. Guys that like pointy stuff didn't care so much about Strats or Les Pauls, and guys that like me who wanted Telecasters and Stratocasters, we didn't really care about the ESPs and the Hamers and all that kind of stuff. And it was only when I wrote the book in 2020 that I realized Hamer, holy cow, that had a better return rate than the Gibson ES 1275. That late 70s or that early pre-production Hamer standard had a better return than almost anything. That's why now I like to tell people that buy that vintage guitar guide, it's not that it neglected what we call the silver era. It's just that there wasn't a lot of information about it.
Right.
The collectors, it was mainly an old school, people that really focused on golden era, blue chip stuff. Well, now, if everybody knows this and everybody now is looking for this 70s and 80s and 90s stuff. That's really what's moving right now. And that's why I would like to go through what I think are the things that are really moving right now that people that are out there collecting stuff should know about, Yeah.
Well, one thing I like to say is one thing about guitar collecting, it's a passion and it's what you have a passion for. And the reason the 80s guitars are shooting up in value right now and in recent years, the guys that went to high school in the 80s, they're in their 50s now, and they can afford to buy these guitars now. So they want to buy the guitars they couldn't afford when they were a kid. They want them now, and that's the way it was with the guys that went to high school in the 60s and the 70s. They want the guitar, so it's the next generation.
Right. And that next generation, like you said, these are now 40, 50-year-old guitars, these 80s, 70s, late 70s stuff. These are guitars that are now vintage guitars.
Yeah.
They are, they're not pre-CBS stuff. They're American-made San Diego, Illinois stuff.
Yeah.
As we say. So Let's go. Let's just get right into it. Like right now, the guitar that I tell everybody, boy, if you had a time machine and you could go back in time, pick up a mid-'70s Hamer Standard.
Yeah.
Those sell for $20,000. A good one, like one that's got everything.
Right.
But that thing doubles in value every 6 years.
I know.
Incredibly. And that's kind of like the high-end Gibson stuff. And as far as the Hamers, let's start with Hamer. What Hamers should people really be looking for?
Well, obviously the Hamer Standard, and also Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick had a lot to do with the popularity of Hamer guitars, and so everybody wants the one that the ones that he played are similar to what he had, and I think that has a lot to do with the value. But definitely the Hamer Standard that's the big one for Hamer guitars.
And it's amazing that even it used to be people wanted the 70s stuff. But now 80s stuff is going for, $9,000.
Right.
Now, when it comes to Hamer Standard, does it have to be bound and crowned?
That's, of course, the most desirable. A flame maple top with the binding and the crown inlet. Definitely, that's going to be the most desirable one. But, and then, of course, some guys, are a lot of collectors. They want to have one of everything. So they're going to have that, and they're going to have the lesser model. And like I collect the BC Rich guitars. So for me, it's all about all these different body shapes in my collection.
And the woods, right?
Yeah, and the woods. Yeah, right. Definitely. Yeah.
Now, the Hamer, another one that just popped up, which really I just kind of completely missed, was the Sunburst. The 1977, the ones that were thin. People now pay well over $5,000 for those.
Yeah.
And are those rare, or are they easy to find?
Well, they're not easy to find, and the earlier ones are not easy to find. You can find later models, like the 90s issues and things like that, but the real early ones in real clean condition are difficult to find for sure.
Should somebody, when it comes to Hamers, do you have to stay with stuff that was made in the USA?
Well, I mean, me personally, I only collect USA guitars, period. But it's also about what you can afford, too. I mean, there are some younger collectors out there that can't afford to put all USA guitars into their collection. And then there's the Korean-made versions of guitars that are, pretty decent quality. And, of course, Japan is just like,
right,
as good or just a small step below USA as far as quality.
Right. What would be a good sleeper if somebody was out there looking for something in Hamer that people don't really talk about, but you think this is the next big thing?
I'm not a big Hamer guy, so you're asking me, I'm
just asking for myself because I don't think I could. I don't think I want to pay $20,000 for a Standard.
I mean, I'm trying to think of the names.
The Scarabs. They have the Carina V's.
Oh yeah, well definitely the Carina V's and the Carina Explorers have gone way up. I mean, they're getting close to the same value as the
Firebirds. I've seen people paying.
Hamer Carina Explorer or V is pretty close. I'm seeing them advertised close to the same pricing as an '83 Gibson Carina V.
Right.
Although those are just moving up and up too. I don't know that they're all selling, but there's a lot of people are sure asking a lot of money for those. I'm lucky I have two of them in my collection that I bought before the pandemic and got into them really at a great price.
Okay.
I have a V and an Explorer from '83 in my collection.
Another one that's just skyrocketing right now are these Jackson Kelly Customs.
Yeah.
What's going on with those?
Well, it's just a very limited number of them made, and these guys want to have them in their collection. I remember the Kelly that everybody was always after, the real early ones that had that little cutaway in the bottom part of the body. Those were really sought after and really rare. They didn't make very many of them. And I was telling you yesterday, I have in my collection a Jackson Siamese double neck.
Right.
So they you have the bottom neck is a reversed headstock, the top neck is a normal headstock, and they tied the two headstocks together. So they call it a Siamese double neck, like Siamese twins,
Now, I think when I think of Jackson, I think of like the very first Jackson that I noticed when I was doing the guide and when I was doing my book were the Randy Rhoads Concords.
Yeah, of course.
And I guess they made two. So you could get an actual '83 Concord And what would that cost you, like to get one of the actual or what we call the USA Randy Rhoads Flying V type USA made ones?
Oh, like a current pricing?
Yeah, like let's say you had an 83 or an 80, one that has a mid serial number or early serial numbers.
I mean, off the top of my head, I would say it's up in the $8,000.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's weird is that they made the two limited edition Concords, like the 2009 and the 1992.
Yeah.
But from what I understand, the 2009 version is the one people really want because I guess that was more accurate. Is that
right? Yeah, that's the big thing is they want it to be accurate, exactly like the first versions that Randy played.
I have in the book now. I have those going for over 7.5.
Yeah,
up to 12. Whereas the 92 ones, the ones that were made at first, limited editions, those are about 6,000 up to about 10,000. But from what I understand, people really want that 2009 Concorde.
I actually have I had some photos from a photo shoot for Jackson. Not photos. I actually had the negatives. Mm-hmm. So back in like the mid 80s, they did this big photo shoot and it was all these rock star guys, Steve Vai, all these 80s guitar players in this big group photo. They used it in like vintage guitar guitar player ads. To advertise, Jackson guitars. And I had these negatives and Grover Jackson contacted me because he heard through the grapevine that I had them. And he wanted to get they had belonged to him at one point in time. He wanted them back. And he actually traded me one of his GJ2 Concorde. It's a gold, metallic gold with a black polka dot, Randy Rhoads style V.
Right.
And I got to go to his shop when he was still here in California and go meet with him in person. And he signed the back of the headstock for me. So I got that in my collection.
I actually put a Jackson, it's going to be coming in the next book, that's over $10,000. And that's the Randy Rhoads Roswell. What do you know about that guitar?
Yeah. Well, I had quite a few of them go through my hands in the early days, like within 5 years or less after they came out. The aluminum body Roswell.
Mm-hmm. Are there different versions of these, or is there only one version?
Yeah, they started coming out with ones that were made out of wood, but the very first ones were actually aluminum body. Mm-hmm. And then the inlays on the fretboard, I believe they were aluminum as well. And they were sort of sought after for sure, and I'm sure they still are now. But I had probably 3 of them go through my hands as a dealer, buying and selling. But they weren't attractive to me to a point to where I wanted to hang on to it and keep it. But I do have another one I have is Jackson polka dot flying V's that they did, but I have serial number 7, one of those, and it's more of the standard like Gibson flying V body shape.
No, I think as far as people that collect Jacksons, I know that it's highly desirable to get what they call the San Dimas, that when they started putting the serialized plates on.
Oh yeah.
And what like those, they started about 1980?
The Jacksons, about 1980 is when they started making them.
And do you believe that those are, if you had one, you could get over $6,000 for that now?
Oh yeah, definitely. And then another way to tell, like on the neck through body Jacksons, if they're San Dimas, is the Made in USA is actually underneath the logo. Mm-hmm. And then when they I think they went over to Ontario and they started putting the Made in USA in front of the logo instead of below the logo.
Right. Now, what about the soloists? Like some of the early 80s soloists, those are going for over $6,000 now.
Yeah, those are definitely really high demand for sure. Yeah. Anything San Dimas is going to be collectible and valuable, and sought after for sure. And then you've got the Strat headstock Charvels. You've got the early. Yeah,
let's go to Charvel. That's kind of where you really, I think that's your expertise, right? Is in the Charvel era.
Yeah, I did a lot of collecting, buying, and selling of them in the 90s and into the early 2000s.
And as far as what I learned, putting everything, I was writing my book and when I was doing the guide, is that pre-production Charvel stuff is expensive, but it's hard to prove it's real.
Yeah.
Can you explain kind of how it's real?
It's very hard to authenticate. And basically to know 100% for sure that it's real is best if you can buy it from an original owner who has documentations or photos dating back to the early days, because they were building guitars for our bodies and necks for DiMarzio, early on. And so people were assembling guitars. And then, of course, things were altered over the years. but it is very difficult to authenticate some of the early pre-production stuff. But the pre-production stuff was like, 1979, 1980, then 81, they started serializing everything. And of course,
right.
If you're buying guitars with serial numbers on them, you feel a lot more comfortable in the fact that it's authentic.
So the earliest 81, for example, like a soft headstock, is that the first one? It comes with the Fender Strat type headstock?
Yeah. They did the Strat headstock all the way into 83, but in 83 they started doing the pointy. There are some like early 83 Strat headstock guitars, but most of them are like 81, 82.
So what's the difference in price between a soft headstock and a serial plated pointy headstock? Is it about $2,000 or $3,000 that you're going to have to pay?
Yeah,
less. Yeah. So people want that soft headstock, and they'll pay over $5,000 easily for it, right?
Right.
And you may get the pointy headstock for about $3,000. You might be able to find it for around $3,000.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, right now is an iffy time with pricing, really, just because of the economy and everything. So,
do you find that these 80s guitars are going up or going down right now?
Well, I think they've gone up over the last 3 to 5 years. And I think with all guitars, 80s or any vintage guitar right now, I think that everything's sort of hit this cap. Mm-hmm. And if you're going on the online websites looking for vintage guitars to buy, whether they're 80s, 70s, whatever, you'll see that a lot of guitars are just sitting. They're not moving. You're not seeing them move. They're just sitting there until somebody who really needs money puts it on sale and drops the price a bit. Mm-hmm. So people aren't, back when everybody was getting all their free COVID money, people were paying at the top of the mark for this stuff.
Right. And that kind of would push this up. I think this pushed a lot of this 80s stuff up. But I personally have seen it kind of stay. It got to where it is. And stuff did get high between last guide and what's coming out now. Prices have gone up considerably, but it's starting to stall out, is what I'm seeing now.
Right. Yeah.
But I tell people that's true about a lot of stuff. That's usually how the market rolls, except that this emerging market is a little bit independent of the golden era stuff.
This episode of Vintage Guitar Magazine's Buy That Guitar podcast is brought to you by Neal's Music. We buy, sell, trade vintage, new, and used musical instruments from the 50s to current models. Check us out at nealsmusic.com.
Tired of high fees and endless haggling? Discover StringTree, the online auction platform for vintage and collectible musical instruments. With detailed listings that tell the stories of instruments and real-time auctions, StringTree makes buying and selling easy and secure. Join now and elevate your collection. Visit stringtree.co today. That's stringtree.co.
Let's now go to your great love, which is BC Rich.
Okay.
I personally did not know until I was really doing the guide. I think I walked in and I met with our buddy Parker, Diablo at a guitar show.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, because he had all these BC Riches.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's really what people are paying for BC Riches now? And he's like, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is probably the brand that has gone up like 30-40% a year in the last 4 or 5 years. Let's talk about BC. What is the BC Rich do you think that is the hottest one right now that people are paying top dollar for?
Well, the 10-string bitch is very difficult to come by, especially early ones, and even more difficult to come by would be the Wave.
Let me ask you about that Wave. So let's say, like the 10-string bitch, I guess it always started out, it was a 10-string guitar originally, right?
Right.
So they really didn't make a 6-string bitch until about 1980, I don't know, maybe 89-ish?
No, they made them earlier than that. There were 6-string versions very early on.
Okay.
Like early 80s.
Okay. Yeah. So let's say you get a 77 10-string bitch and it's a Koa body. What would you have to pay for that right now?
You'd be lucky to get it for $10,000.
So it's up. It's well over nine grand.
Yeah, like probably 10 to 12 grand is, for a real clean example, that's like a late 70s. Yeah, it's going to be.
And then what if it was a opaque finish? It wasn't Koa.
Probably a little less, but not much less. Probably 8,000 to 10,000 range.
And then let's say you get to the highly flamed ones. Are they going to be more or than the Koas? Are they about the same as Koas? Are they
Well,
less?
they didn't start the flame maple stuff till much later, like
78-ish?
More like into the nine. Oh, you mean like just like a maple?
Yeah.
Like a 10-string maple body?
Yeah.
Yeah. And none of them really had highly flame maple. Most of them were either no flame or just slightly figured. So you never really saw any with like heavy flame maple in that era. It wasn't really until like in the mid 80s, maybe, and then into the later 90s when Bernie took back over his shop and where you were really starting to see them really use heavy flame maple woods. But most of the early stuff was just standard maple, Koa. The painted guitars, some were mahogany, and sometimes it would paint right over Koa wood. But I've actually seen guys strip the finish off of a guitar because it had Koa underneath, and they wanted to turn it into a natural Koa.
Now the Wave, did that only come out in 1983, or was it actually? Did they make them for a while?
They made them for maybe more like around 83 to about 86, something like that, or 80. Yeah, in that range.
And what was
just 83? But
okay, I have it in the book as a 1983. I might not have the price correct on this because I didn't realize the Wave was so rare. What do you think it was? What's the price range for the Wave right now?
I think it's up there right around the same as the. Probably $8,000 to $10,000. You never even see one for sale. I mean, if you go looking for one, you're not going to find it. You don't even see them out there. So it's sort of like whatever somebody's willing to pay. You know, I have one in my collection. Mine actually is serial number. So another thing about BC Rich is they got way ahead on their numbers. Like initially, it was supposed to be the first two numbers. We're going to tell you what year it is. So the serial number on my Wave starts with 84. But it's probably was built more like in around 82. They're saying everybody's saying it's about 2 years ahead of what the serial number reads.
Like as far as the Eagle and the Eagle Supreme, are those they're not as expensive as the bitches?
Well, the Eagle Supreme, like if you're looking at one, and I have one in my collection, but if you're looking at one with cloud inlays, ebony fretboard, binding, that's a high dollar guitar as well. Probably at least $8,000 for that guitar. But then there's the Eagle with the diamond inlays and the rosewood fretboard. Those are going to be more. I mean, if you're lucky, you'll get one under $5,000, but probably $5,000 to $6,000 range right now.
And then the Mockingbirds, no, they're about the same, right?
I think they're riding about the same range, like around the $5,000 to $6,000 for like a diamond inlay. But if you get a Supreme with the cloud inlays and binding, it bumps it up a little bit.
Is there a price difference?
There's also the two versions of the Mockingbird.
There's a short horn and the long horn. Are they about the same price then, or is one more desirable than the other?
I think the short horn, I think there's a fewer quantity of them available out there. They typically could be a little more, but they're not greatly more. And I think it's just because of how desirable they are to collectors or a guitar player. Like some people, prefer the Longhorn over the Shorthorn as far as the look of the guitar, you know.
And then as far as like the Seagull and the Warlock, those are they're a little lower priced compared to the other.
For many years, the Seagull was like the lowest value guitar, and it's just because it's not a very attractive looking guitar. But in recent years, they've gone up quite a bit because people like me that collect BC Rich, they want to have one of every guitar in their collection. So to fulfill that, they need to get a Seagull into the collection. And I think that's helped bump the value up on them a bit. But they're still not as desirable as a Mockingbird or probably the Mockingbird is one of the most desirable body shapes.
And to get one in the 70s or late 70s, early 80s, you're paying $5,000 now, easy.
Yeah,
one.
Definitely. And then the BC Rich bitch became real popular, and like in '78, Joe Perry was on the cover of Guitar Player magazine, and he had a 10-string red bitch on the cover, which had Bill Lawrence pickups in it actually, but he only had it strung up as a 6-string. he didn't play it as a 10 string. He played it as a 6 string, which the majority of people do. And I think it's more about the bling of having those 4 tuning keys on the body than it is about the functionality of playing it as a 10 string.
Yeah.
For most people.
Now let's go to the Dean. Now this is kind of for some reason, even though Dean was when I think back to all my friends, when I was, especially when I was in the Navy, there was guys like me playing Telecasters and Stratocasters, but all my other buddies, they were all playing Deans and Charvels and Jacksons. And I remember the Dean I always wondered why Dean really never caught up the way Jackson did. But it seems like this year they're starting to pop a little bit.
Yes.
And like, I guess the one that everybody knows is the ML.
Sure. That was because of Dimebag Darrell from Pantera made those very popular. So
like, let's say you get a late 70s, early 80s ML standard. What is that going to run you now?
Late 70s. Like 4,000 to 6,000.
Yeah.
Like you said, they haven't really exploded in value like say BC Rich or some of the other brands have.
And do you know why that is? I mean, because I'm kind of confused. People ask me that and I don't have an answer.
I think it's because of the people that are interested in Dean guitars. A lot of them are heavy metal guys, and I just don't think there's a lot of collectors in that. That are into that style of music that collect high-end guitars. You know what I mean? I think that has something to do with it. Although there are some major Dimebag Darrell fanatics that will pay big dollar for certain models. And I was telling you yesterday how I came across I bought a collection of Dean guitars from a family. And one of the guitars was a Washburn. It's the one with the cross on the body. And I had no idea it's the BSG Washburn with the cross and the flame top on it. But I had no idea when I bought it. I was assuming it was like a $3,000 or $4,000 guitar. And after I got home with it and did more research, I found out it was more like a close to a $9,000 guitar.
Wow.
And currently I see one for sale online for $11,000. So, and that's, the reason the value is there. There's very few of those made, and there's the Dimebag connection,
Right. Now, the one thing I'm having a hard time pricing right now is the Dimebag Darrell Rush from Hell. 2005, they made about 120 of these.
Yeah.
Are those hard to find, or are they like I had those at a higher price last year? This year I couldn't support that high price. So I don't know if the price on that is starting to fall, or if I just can't find enough data on that one.
I think it's just all about supply and demand, and how many of them are available on the market currently. I've been a Dean dealer dating back to like early 2000s. I'm sitting here looking, I've got 3 plaques from Dean Guitars. In 2005, 2006, and 2008, I was designated in the top 10 Dean dealers in the world as far as like number of sales. So we sold many of those guitars and Mini USA. My wife works with me in the business, and she's been great as far as working with all the manufacturers.
What would you say? Like, what would you say that Dimebag Darrell Rust from Hell is worth right now?
I'd say like 5,000 to 6,000.
Okay, that's what I have it at. I have to pat myself on the back. I've been hitting these things, but I mentioned all the guys that helped me this year. I spent hours on the phone with people, just making sure that I want people that read the Vintage Guitar Magazine guide to know that we really care about this 80s and 90s emerging market. We really are focusing on it. And I think the magazine itself is doing many, many more articles on some of these guitars, because there's a whole new generation of collector now coming in. Like you were saying, they want to play the guitar that they loved as a kid, and saw as a kid. Before we leave Dean, what about the Vs and the Zs? Are those highly desirable, the old Bursts, the V standards and the Z standards?
There are guys that like them and buy them for sure, but I think, again, I think the most desirable is going to be the ML because of the Dimebag connection. But But, there are, people who would collect Dean guitars just like me as a BC Rich collector are going to want one of each body shape. So they're going to want a Z, a V, and an ML in their collection. There was also the Cadillac, which is similar to a Les Paul, but with a pointy cutaway. And, oh man, what's his name from the Cars? Not Rick Ocasek, but the other guitar player. He played one of those Cadillacs for a while. And then even Steve Clark from Def Leppard, he was playing a Dean Cadillac for a while. And then ZZ Top, they were playing Dean guitars too.
Right. I think we all remember that one.
The furry ones.
The furry ones, yep. When they would spin them, I think they may have even come with the spinner on the back. I don't know. Where you could flip them around. I don't know. Now, listen. Now, here's something I get asked all the time, and I'm always asking you guys, Kramer. Why is it that people will want the Charvels, they want the Jacksons, but for some reason these Kramers are kind of left out in the cold? Nobody's really paying top dollar now for Kramers. Is there a reason for that, or is it just the market's just coming? That's an emerging market too, or what?
Well, I feel like the Kramer connection is going to be Eddie Van Halen. And, that's where, most Van Halen enthusiasts are going to collect Kramer guitars, or want at least a Kramer Beretta in their collection that's going to be similar to what Eddie had. But, and then there's the Night Swan, I believe one of the guitar players from Whitesnake made that famous. And
when it comes to the Beretta and it comes to the Night Swan, it's really the graphic that determines the price now, right?
Yeah, graphics are very important.
So what Beretta graphic is the one people will pay the most money for? I've seen the mask, the comedy mask.
Oh yeah.
The masks. I think I see that one go. I saw one sell in my records. I have one sold for around $6,000, which is pretty for a Beretta. That's pretty high for a late '80s Beretta. But I don't know if there's other. I know there's quite a few graphics out there, but I know that the masks. Was it the Pleasure and Pain, or I forget what video that was. He played that in. But that one, I see people pay big bucks for that one. The Night Swan, it's the polka dot one, the dark blue polka dot one. And why is that? Why is that people will pay $10,000 for that graphic?
It's because of God, I can't think of the guitar player's name, but it's the guitar player. It's all about who played the guitar
and when it was seen,
especially with with the 80s. It's all about your guitar hero.
And I think as far as Kramer also, people always think about the DMZs. When he left the Travis Bean, and he started making this very similar with the metal necks, but those never seem to go up in price, do they? The DMZ custom series, like the 3000s and the.
Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, I mean, people really want the first versions. The original Dean guitars in the very beginning. Although, Dean Zielinski is making some really nice guitars, nice products. I'm on his mailing list. I see all of his guitars; they look beautiful. But most collectors are going to go for the early USA Dean stuff. Yeah.
So now
I just pulled up on the computer here. I'm in a Def Leppard tribute band. I didn't even think about it, but Vivian Campbell was the guitar player in Whitesnake, and
Vivian Campbell. I'm sorry, yeah,
and he played that Night Swan. So, it's all about your guitar hero when it comes down to some of these graphics. That's why you want that graphic, because you want the one that your guitar hero played on stage.
Right. So another thing, Ibanez now, even though I was going to do a whole show on lawsuit era, but Ibanez. Post-lawsuit era, they really, really are now extremely collectible. And we're talking about like the Joe Satriani and the Stevie Vai. That stuff is now commanding big bucks. Do you sell a lot of those? Is there big demand? Do you find people hunting for the Stevie Vai and the universe and the multicolors and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's definitely guys that are heavily into the Ibanez stuff, which has a lot to do with Steve Vai. And in his use of them, and they want the Steve Vai model in their collection. But there's definitely a demand for Ibanez guitars, the 80s style. Then you have the guys that collect the 70s, like the Ives Artist and, the double necks with the vine inlay up and down the fretboard. And, there's a whole...
One thing I learned was that the original Icemans, the ones that came out in 1975,
yes,
they were called the Flash 1, the 2, the Flash 3. People are paying almost over $5,000 for those now.
Sure. Yeah, and that goes right to Paul Stanley from Kiss,
right.
Making that popular.
I remember that guitar. Every kid had that on his wall, right, hanging up. Paul Stanley playing the Iceman.
Yeah. I mean, 80s is really, the collecting of 80s guitars has a lot to do with the rock star that you love, and what guitar they played. So
now let's go back
a connection there
to those gems. Those, I had a lot of help. My buddy Brett Coleman, who everybody knows Brett Coleman, his greatest claim to fame is that his purple multicolor is on the cover of last year's guide. I'm joking, Brett. But he was so nice and helped me with this because I really didn't know much about Steve Vai's guitars. I remember when I was in the Navy and I had money, I remember they were the beautiful ones that we saw, but I didn't really play that. I was, that movie Crossroads, I was always rooting for the other guy.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't rooting for Stevie Vai. I was rooting for the Telecaster guy. But now I've seen the error of my ways in many ways. And I see that, wow, I really wish I would have bought some of those early Stevie Vai, stuff. And I think, you think about the most beautiful guitars, I think, are these multicolors that they did. That Ibanez did, and I guess it's the gem Y2K DNA.
The iridescent colors.
Over $10,000 now. You want one of those? And beautiful, beautiful guitars. But the one thing I learned from Brett, I really didn't know, was that the Joe Satriani stuff. The special JS, the ones that were hand painted by Donnie Hunt and his sister. Those are big bucks. You got to pay over $7,000 for those, and but they're so hard to find. I think that. I don't know how many. I think 22 to like maybe a few hundred were made of these. But
sure.
But I tell people all the time, man, look for those hand painted Joe Satriani guitars, the JS, the Chrome Boys, the real ones. Yeah. That I guess that the Chrome didn't really stay on it. I don't know what happened with those. I know it's very hard to find one that's. I think they had an issue with the Chrome, but I know the Donnie Hunt and the Electric Rainbow and the Rainforest paintings. Those are over $7,000 easy. Yeah, the Y2K stuff. So that to me is like that's a whole new market. That whole Ibanez really, really influenced a generation of kids. That those are now vintage guitars. Those Ibanez, those are now, vintage guitars. They're 40 years old. So
yeah, it all comes back to supply and demand and the age range of these collectors and, what was popular when they were in high school and learning to play the guitar and all of their guitar heroes,
So is there anything that I've missed that, because you would know more than I would. I basically just used what I had in the guide to flag stuff, but this, you've been selling this stuff for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
What is something out there like, people that don't know about, or what's emerging? Like, what would you tell people? Hey, look for this.
Wow. Well, as we were talking, though, the thought came through my mind that someday people are going to be collecting 1990s and early 2000s guitars, but it's all about the music that they love as they're growing up, and that's what influences you to collect certain brands or models. And then I think it all goes back to your favorite rock star and what they played, and that's what influences you to want to collect that stuff. It's all about music. Comes back to music. Now,
you were telling me, we were talking a couple of days ago and yesterday as well, that in the old days, the OC guitar shows, people would walk through the door and because there really is this divide, between old school and new school, that people would come in and they would have their Stratocaster and Telecaster. The guys would jump on them. But if they came through and they had something in a Charvel case or a BC Rich case, they would just send them right to you, right?
Yeah, they go see Neal. He's the guy that buys those kind of guitars. Yeah, the Charvel, the Jackson, the BC Rich, that was me. And I was saying, in recent years, I have not been doing booths at the guitar show, and now Parker from Diablo Guitars he's got the booth at the guitar show, and I think he's the guy now.
Yes,
although I think all of these nowadays, I think these guys that used to send everybody to me, I think they're starting to look at, hey, wait a minute, I should buy this Charvel or Jackson because I know I can make a profit on this thing. So they're not just sending them, unfortunately for Parker, I don't think everyone's sending them to his booth. I think they're trying to buy the guitar too and make a profit on it.
I see Parker every guitar show now. He gives me so much time. He kind of laughs because I just take out my notes and I just start taking notes because he'll tell me ESP this, ESP that. And you'll see in the next guide, in the 2025 guide, people kind of, there's going to be two ESP guitars that are now listed that are over $10,000. And that's from Parker telling me that he sold one for this and sold one for that. And that's kind of like, and will that be next year or the year after? Maybe not. Yeah. It all has to do, like you say.
He's like me. He's very passionate about the 80s.
And guitars. I love, I think I said my very first podcast, like, you'll go into these guitar shows and the young guys don't know what they're got. Parker's not one of those guys. Parker's a guy that knows his stuff. And, I sit with, he always gives me his time and we sit and talk about stuff and his guys, they have good stuff, they have stuff. And it's almost like looking in a museum and what is hot. I always think of it as what is hot right now is what they have displayed at that time. So I give a bit of shout out to Parker. He's always been really helpful to me. Yeah. Oh, before we go, you're famous for more than just selling guitars. You also have one of the largest talent management companies on the West Coast right now. Isn't that true?
Yes, that's true.
And what do you specialize in?
Tribute bands. I specialize in tribute bands. And of course, my love of collecting guitars came from being a guitar player. That was first and foremost me wanting to play music. So, over the years, I did everything everyone else does. I played in original bands. I had an original band called Black Triangle. We had one song placed on The Pretender on NBC on the 1999 season finale. Mm-hmm. And I didn't go much farther than that with original music. And then in the late 90s, I was seeing, back then there were very few tribute bands. There's the Atomic Punks. There was Wild Child.
My band actually opened for the Atomic Punks.
Yeah, I did many times too. Back when Ralph was the singer, who is now the singer for Steel Panther. Steel Panther. Yeah. Anyhow, so I found this niche in tribute bands, and I've been doing an Aerosmith and a Def Leppard tribute since 2002.
Do you play the lead guitar in the tribute band?
I play the part of Brad Whitford, and me and my Joe Perry guy, we sort of share the leads. He does a little bit. He does more than me, obviously, because he's playing the Joe Perry part. But early on, I sort of said, hey, I want to play more than Brad does. So I'm playing a little more than Brad does.
It's funny, when I saw Aerosmith live for the first time, I was blown away by how much Brad Whitford he had the most important parts of the songs.
Yeah, well,
the riffs were his.
The early stuff, he's doing the solos on a lot.
Yeah,
like Last Child, he plays the solo on that.
Yeah,
song.
I just remember watching. I wasn't really paying attention so much to Joe Perry. I was watching Brad Whitford going, wow, I had no idea that he was doing all that. So you play the Brad Whitford, and so what's guitar do you use mostly?
Les Pauls, and in fact, my main guitar is a 2001 58 reissue that I've been playing for more than 20 years that I love. And then my secondary guitar is actually an all-gold Les Paul that I bought from Brad Whitford. It's a 1989 all-gold 1960 Les Paul Classic. And Brad actually played it on the Wayne's World skit on Saturday Night Live. So like if you go up on YouTube and you pull up the Wayne's World skit where Aerosmith was playing the Wayne's World Party Time song on Saturday Night Live, Brad is playing the guitar that I now own, the all gold Les Paul from 1989.
Have you ever done a show when somebody in Aerosmith is in the audience?
No, but we've met Steven Tyler on multiple occasions. We have had Jimmy Crespo come and sit in with us. He was in Aerosmith for a few years. They're in the late 70s, early 80s. And we've had Raymond Tabano, who was a founding member of Aerosmith. Brad Whitford actually took his place.
Right.
and we've had both of them come on stage. Raymond's been on stage with us multiple times performing with the band.
Mm-hmm. As far as tribute bands come, what is the most sought after tribute band?
Well, some of the bands that are getting the big bucks, amazingly, you know, I would think it'd be like Aerosmith, but it's like Bee Gees, ABBA. I manage.
That's probably
ABBA
harder
LA.
to do. That's probably really hard to pull off.
Yeah, I manage the band ABBA LA, and they're making double what my bands are making.
Yeah,
sometimes triple. You know, but it's just the popularity of it. You know, and then I also do a Def Leppard tribute band called Pyromania. We just brought in Andrew Freeman on lead vocals. Andrew sings with Vivian Campbell, the actual guitar player from Def Leppard, in the band Last in Line. So, you know, tribute bands have become a viable way of making a living as a musician. And so you have a lot of these guys that are playing in national acts are actually doing tribute bands on the side as well, because I know they can make a good living here.
Right. That was a problem with the Psychedelic Moods. We couldn't make any money because we just did original music, and people would ask us to play cover songs, and we wouldn't, you know. And guess what? You don't come back. They don't ask you back when you don't play cover songs. I'm
in like 6 bands. So I do Aerosmith, Def Leppard. I do a Creedence Clearwater tribute, a Nickelback tribute. I do a band called Monsters of Rock, which does a variety of 80s rock. And then I do a band called the Disco Freaks, where we play 70s disco music.
That's fun.
And then there's if they go on my website for Neal's music, they're also going to be on the nealshelton.com website, which has over 100 tribute bands up there.
In the comments, we'll put the links to your stores, your online stores, and you have them all listed in there. I was on there. But this was fascinating, Neal. But I had so much fun. I just love talking guitars. And so...
me too.
And I can't thank you enough.
My favorite thing.
I mentioned it earlier in the beginning, there's many oars pushing that yacht, the Vintage Guitar Guide, through the water, and you're one of the guys that every month you send me a list of what you sell, and you help me, especially when we put everything in the cement. And I can't thank you enough for all your help putting the guide together. And I just love talking 80s guitars with you. And now everybody out there will know a little bit more, I think, about what is now the emerging market. And don't be ashamed to go buy that Dean that you always kind of were looking at. You know, don't be ashamed. Thank you again, Neal.
Thank you for including me in the podcast. Much appreciated.
All righty. Thank you so much.
All right. You take care.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. If you have any questions you want to ask about all the podcasts we're putting up or podcasts you want to hear in the future, send me an email at ram@vintageguitar.com. I'll answer any of your questions. I'll fit these questions in with the shows we're doing. We had a great feedback about shows people want to hear or topics that we discussed, and we're going to try to start addressing those as we go from here. Any message you want to send me, ram@vintageguitar.com. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment on this podcast. Thank you.
This episode of Vintage Guitar Magazine's Buy That Guitar podcast is brought to you by Neal's Music. We buy, sell, trade vintage, new, and used musical instruments from the 50s to current models. Check us out at nealsmusic.com.
Tired of high fees and endless haggling? Discover Stringtree, the online auction platform for vintage and collectible musical instruments. With detailed listings that tell the stories of instruments and real-time auctions, Stringtree makes buying and selling easy and secure. Join now and elevate your collection. Visit stringtree.co today. That's stringtree.co.